What if Garp was a pirate instead of a marine monkey? Garp, the marine hero who could shatter mountains, was the world government's greatest weapon. But what if he had turned pirate instead? Would the seas bow to the fist of the sea, or would the world burn in chaos? The fist of the sea. Garp's rise as an emperor. Garp was always a monster when it came to raw power. Whether you call him a marine, a legend, or a battle-hungry lunatic, the man was built differently. But imagine if, instead of staying loyal to the world government, he had embraced piracy. The seas wouldn't just tremble, they'd straight up have a panic attack. The world already feared his fists when he was a marine. As a pirate, he would have been a force of nature, a hurricane wrapped in a human body, punching his way through anything that stood in his way. They would have called him the Fist of the Sea, and honestly, no name would have suited him better. While other emperors like Whitebeard and Kaido built their empires on sheer strength and influence, Garp's rule would have been different. He never cared about treasure, fancy castles, or ruling territories just for the sake of it. What he did care about was freedom, the ability to do things his way, protect his family, and punch corrupt officials in the face whenever he wanted. Instead of hoarding gold like Big Mom or flexing his brute force like Kaido, Garp would have spent his days knocking over any oppressive regime that annoyed him, much to the world government's horror. His presence would have reshaped the balance of power in the New World. He wouldn't be the kind of emperor who ruled through fear. He'd be the type who commanded respect, not just because he was strong, which he was, but because he stood for something different. Pirates, Marines, and revolutionaries alike would have seen him as a man who played by his rules, not the world government's. He would have been a wild card in the pirate world, a walking disaster for the Marines, and an absolute nightmare for the Celestial Dragons. And let's be real, his Jolly Roger would have been hilarious. Maybe a clenched fist with a crack running through it symbolizes how he smashes through anything in his way. Or maybe just a dog, as a middle finger to Sengoku for all the times he called him a mad dog. Either way, the moment that flag rose in the sky, even the toughest pirates would have started sweating. The turning point, Garp's decision to defect. There are moments in history that change everything. Goldie Roger's execution, that was one of them. But imagine if it had affected Garp just a little differently. What if, instead of staying with the Marines, he had finally said, "You know what? Screw this," and walked away? Garp was never fully loyal to the world government. He followed orders when he felt like it, ignored them when they were stupid, and spent most of his time punching people instead of filling out paperwork. But Roger's death was different. Roger was his rival, a man he had fought for years, a man he respected. And when Roger entrusted him with his unborn son, it wasn't just a burden, it was a sign. A sign that maybe, just maybe, the world government wasn't the good guy in this story. Raising Ace must have put all sorts of thoughts in his head. Every time he looked at that kid, he saw Roger's spirit. The fire, the stubbornness, the undeniable will to live free. But as Ace grew up, Garp saw the cracks in the system that he had spent his life defending. The Marines weren't about justice anymore. They were about control. Corruption was spreading faster than Buggy's lies, and the Celestial Dragons were sitting on their thrones, treating people like dirt. Garp had spent his entire life fighting pirates because he believed they were the problem. But what if he was on the wrong side? That's when the moment happened. Maybe it was something small, a whispered order from the higher-ups, a demand that went too far. Maybe they wanted him to do something he couldn't stomach, like handing over Ace for execution. Or maybe, after years of biting his tongue, he just snapped. One day, Garp simply walked out of Marineford. No goodbyes, no regrets. Just the simple decision to stop fighting for a system that had lost its way. Garp's pirate crew, legends of the New World. You can't be an emperor without a crew, and Garp wasn't about to sail alone like some rogue lunatic. The real question is, who would follow him? First off, he'd need some heavy hitters. Garp wouldn't just recruit any random scallywags looking for treasure. He'd pick people with strength, honor, and just enough craziness to keep up with him. Would Silver's Rayleigh, the Dark King himself, hop aboard? Probably not. He was busy drinking his way through retirement. But there were plenty of other warriors out there, including former Marines who were just as sick of the system as he was. Imagine if Garp recruited Jaguar D. Saul, the giant marine-turned-rebel who hated the world government for their cruelty? Or what if he convinced Smoker, years later, obviously, to jump ship, seeing the same corruption that pushed Garp away? Maybe even Aokiji, because let's be honest, Aokiji is way too chill to stay under Akainu's rule forever. But it wouldn't just be ex-Marines. Garp would attract wildcards, warriors who followed strength and respected his vision. Maybe he'd recruit a few rogue revolutionaries, fighters who didn't quite fit in with Dragon's silent rebellion approach. Hell, I wouldn't put it past him to have pirates in his ranks too, ones who weren't complete psychopaths. His leadership style? Strict, but hilarious. Garp wasn't the kind of captain who gave long-winded speeches about loyalty and dreams. He'd just say, "You follow me, you fight hard, and if you mess up, I punch you through a mountain." Simple, effective, and terrifying. As for their goal, they wouldn't be like Kaido, ruling with fear, or Big Mom, treating their crew like a dysfunctional family. Garp's crew would be pirate enforcers of justice, the one crew that did well while still being outlaws. If there was an oppressive kingdom, Garp would show up, break some walls, and teach the tyrants a lesson. If the Marines tried to shut him down, good luck. The Garp Dragon Rift, father versus revolutionary Garp being a pirate, would have done something truly incredible. It would have made Monkey D. Dragon look reasonable by comparison. Think about it. In the original timeline, Dragon was the ultimate rebel, the most wanted man in the world, and the guy leading a full-blown revolution against the world government. But in this timeline, he wouldn't be the wild card. That title would belong to his father, the Fist of the Sea. Imagine Dragon's reaction when the news broke. His old man, the so-called hero of the Marines, had defected and was now one of the 4 emperors. That's not a midlife crisis. That's full-scale chaos. If Dragon was hoping to operate from the shadows, building his army and slowly chipping away at the world government's power, well, Garp just kicked that plan off a cliff. Subtlety? Not in this family. Dragon had always been a man of strategy. He wasn't interested in just throwing punches, he wanted to change the world. Unlike Garp, who probably saw corruption and just thought, time to punch it, Dragon took a more calculated approach. He built the revolutionary army step by step, gathering people who believed in a new future. But his father's actions would have thrown a massive wrench in his plans. The two of them were destined to clash. Garp's version of justice was simple. If he saw something wrong, he destroyed it with his fists. He didn't believe in systems, in grand ideologies, in waiting for the right time to act. He was an emperor of the sea, a living storm, a guy who did things. Dragon, on the other hand, believed in playing the long game. He wanted to dismantle the world government from within, strike where it hurt the most, and replace it with something better. Their biggest fight wouldn't be over strength, it would be over ideals. Garp would laugh in Dragon's face every time he talked about careful planning. Why waste time scheming when you can just win? He'd say, probably mid-punch. Dragon, meanwhile, would be furious that his father's chaotic nature was making things harder for the revolutionaries. With Garp throwing islands into anarchy, the world government would clamp down harder, making Dragon's mission even more difficult. The legacy of the Fist. How Ace, Sabo, and Luffy change having Garp as a pirate wouldn't have just changed history, it would have completely reshaped the futures of Ace, Sabo, and Luffy. They already looked up to him in the original timeline, but this version of Garp wouldn't be just an annoying grandpa who threw them into the jungle for fun. He'd be a living legend, a man who took on the world government and won. Ace and Sabo wouldn't have needed anyone else. No Whitebeard, no revolutionary army. They had Garp. He would have trained them himself, and let's be real, Garp's version of training wasn't for the weak-hearted. The man punched mountains for fun. Ace and Sabo would have gone through the most brutal training regimen of all time, and it would have paid off. They wouldn't just be strong, they'd be monsters by the time they reached adulthood. Ace wouldn't have joined Whitebeard's crew because, well, why would he? He had a family and a crew already. Instead, he'd have been one of the rising stars in Garp's pirate empire, carrying his grandfather's insane strength and indomitable will. He'd still want to prove himself, but instead of trying to take down Whitebeard to make a name for himself, he'd be proving himself worthy of his grandfather's legacy. Sabo, he'd still be the strategist, but instead of being Dragon's right-hand man, he'd be Garp's, the one guy in the crew who used his brain while Garp and Ace were busy punching everything in sight. He'd refine their tactics, making sure they weren't just strong, but unstoppable. The battle for Wano, Garp versus Kaido. Garp wasn't the kind of man to ignore injustice. If he had been a pirate, one thing is for sure, Kaido wouldn't have been ruling Wano for long. The moment Garp heard about Wano's suffering under Kaido, he would have immediately set sail, not for political reasons, not for power, just because the idea of some oversized dragon tyrant bullying an entire country would have pissed him off. Garp wouldn't have played it smart either. No sneaky infiltration, no careful strategy. He would have announced his attack by literally punching his way through Kaido's front gates. The beast pirates would have no idea what hit them. Queen, knocked into next week. King, sent flying. Jack? Oh, poor Jack. He wouldn't have survived 5 minutes. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.